And welcome into Gator Bytes on the 1010XL.com podcast network, also being simulcast on the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. Today's Gator podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for any orthopedic injury or concern. They have numerous locations here in both Jacksonville and St. Augustine. That includes Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. He is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker, Ryan Green. You are Florida Gator fans, presumably. That's why you're watching and listening to Gator Bytes, as Florida comes off a regular season of 7-5, a dominating win over Florida State. A very good, won't call it great, certainly wouldn't call it average. I'd call it a very good signing day this Wednesday. And we got to start getting into Gator hoops a little bit. They're going to be just outside the top 10 by this time next week. So there's a lot going on. And Graham, look, I mean, the bottom line is you called the Florida over Florida State game a month ago. I had a little more trepidation than you did just because I know about Doak Campbell Stadium. I know about the awful things that have happened in there in the past. I don't think Florida played particularly well on offense, certainly. And despite that, the game was still never in doubt. It goes to show you the difference in talent between those two rosters.
The difference in talent and the difference in belief and hope and trying. It's not to say Florida State quit. I mean, they had some fight in them and they tried. And Cromanhope has a little juice. I think if you got him a decent offensive line, I think he'd look better.
Yeah, when your guy gets sacked 8 times, there's not much you can do there.
Yeah, but I mean, I definitely agree with you. Defensively, they for the most part shut him down. Got lucky with a couple of turnovers as well. But defensively, I thought they played not lights out, but close to it. Offensively was clunky most of the night. You got the sense that for whatever reason, early in the game, it maybe was some rivalry game jitters or what have you. Lagway was just a hair off.
Yeah, he was off
a couple times, and then it seemed after that, it seemed hard to kind of ever generate a real nice rhythm for the rest of the game. It was weird, Hack. There were some guys playing significant snaps in that game that I haven't seen play in a long time. I mean, Tony Livingston's out there catching balls, and Marcus Burke hasn't played he's been hurt, I know, but Marcus Burke's out there getting a ton of snaps. And I'm like, Elijah Badger only had a couple of catches, and he's been your most productive receiver all year. And Chim Dike, it took him a while to get involved. And it was kind of odd who was getting some snaps, wasn't it?
And the running game kind of took over in the second half. The Gator offensive line kind of beat up the FSU D line. I think the Florida State defense, too, when you get to midway through the third quarter, I think it was pretty apparent to them that their offense was doing nothing. And you kind of, at that point, I mean, they are human beings, right? You can only fight for so long when you're not getting any help on the other side of the ball. But big picture, look, I mean, I said this offseason, I think you said it too, I would have taken 7-5 in an absolute heartbeat.
Yep.
And they finished 7-5. So I am ecstatic at the way the Florida football season played out. If you're a Gator fan, you should be ecstatic. I think Billy Napier obviously did a good job. We'll talk about what it meant to recruiting coming up here in a moment. But 7-5, navigating that schedule, winning 3 in a row, including ending streaks like the Kentucky game where you had a 3-game losing streak to them. You beat them. 5-game losing streak to LSU. You beat them.
Yep.
Florida State had gotten you a few times in a row. You beat them.
You know what's crazy? Florida State had only beaten them 2 years in a row.
Yeah, but it wasn't like 7 out of 8 or something, or it was like 6 out of 8.
I think that's true because Mullen never lost to them.
Yeah, maybe that's right. But I guess so. I guess I'm thinking.
But to your point, though, it feels like Florida State had gotten the better of them more.
Yeah.
But in 2021, with Greg Knox as the interim, Anthony Richardson and Damian Pierce won that football game.
Mullen was 4-0 against them?
Mullen was 3-0. The 2020 game never got played.
Okay.
So 18 and 19. So he was 2-0 because he wasn't the coach in the 21 game because he had gotten fired. So he's 2-0, 18 and 19.
Interesting.
Because 2020 never got put, but Florida would have murdered that 2020 Florida State. Would have murdered them.
Yeah, but you're right. It had felt like a long time since they beat Florida State. And really, look, the last time they went to Doak Campbell, they just couldn't tackle Jordan Travis.
Yeah.
And then last year, Florida State with a backup quarterback wins the game, which was awful. But
Well, Florida had a backup quarterback.
Florida had a backup quarterback too.
Max
but
Brown.
still, you're at the Swamp, Max Brown versus...
Yeah, I mean, Tate Rodemaker, though, and they were undefeated.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. And
Florida State was supposed to win that game.
And Florida gave him a battle. Florida gave him a great battle. But regardless, none of that really matters. Florida wins the game. What was interesting to me, we talk about the flag at the 50-yard line, and that got all the play. The celebration for the Gators, the victory cigars, the taking pictures on the field, they went over the top. It was interesting, and I don't know if that was kind of a message to kids with signing day looming, that Florida's kind of the big dog in that rivalry now, or whatever it was, but their social media, the victory cigars, the flag planting, you encompass all of it. That was quite the celebration for the Gators on Saturday night. Yeah,
I think it was a little bit, it was a little similar to 2 years ago when Florida State beat them, when Jordan Travis just went crazy in Doak Campbell in 2022. I think Florida's celebration was kind of similar to that. If you remember that in that game, Florida wasn't very good that year. And if you remember, Florida State stormed the field.
Yeah, they stormed the field, and Florida was like 6-5 or whatever.
Right. But I think the reason that they did storm the field was it was less about that game by itself and more about a culmination of like kind of a major comeback season they had that year after it had been a really tough go for a couple of years and then finally starting to look good again. With Florida smoking the cigars, I think it was kind of like that. It wasn't just a celebration to beat Florida State. It was also, look at this turnaround we just completed. Look at beating LSU, beating Ole Miss, and being 7-5. 7-5's not exactly a national title. I get it. But that team and what they did and picking themselves up off the mat after such a disastrous start to the season and to turn around and finish 7-5, I think it was more a celebration of a culmination of what they had done, not just Florida State by itself.
And look, I didn't mind it. The flag planting, whatever. I think the NCAA is going to do something to regulate that. You don't want to see fights. But
they're going to have to, because here's the problem, Hack. Fights or whatever, like I kind of like when fights happen in games. The problem is after the game, you've got reporters on the field, and you could have kids on the field, and old people could be on the field that might get pushed. Like what there's an 85, 9-year-old person on the field that gets pushed out. What if they die? You know what I mean? Like there's too many really
cops using pepper spray in Columbus, Ohio last week, which was wild.
You obviously can't have that. I don't have an issue with planting the flag, and if I lost and a team planted the flag, I'd be like, well, we lost. That said, giant bench clearing brawls at the end of a game when there's non-football players, and that can't happen.
Well, the thing with me with Mike Norvell, he takes the flag out and throws it or whatever. The guy lets his players take a gator head around the swamp and do whatever he wants. They have a thing called a sod cemetery where they literally have scissors or shears or whatever, cut up another person's field that does not belong to you, bring it back to Tallahassee, and bury it in the sod cemetery. There's no issue with that. But if a team puts their flag on the 50-yard line, that's just not going to happen here. Well, Mike, let me tell you something. You're lucky Boston College didn't do that to you. You're lucky North Carolina didn't do that to you. You're lucky Clemson didn't do that to you. You're lucky Memphis didn't do that to you. You see a pattern here? Everybody controlled your home field this year. Everybody came in there and did whatever they wanted. So that was an interesting statement Mike Norvell made. Now, he got ripped for that nationally, and with good reason.
It's one thing in the Ohio State-Michigan game, the Ohio State parties that had an issue and were coming up and pushing and shoving were players. And that's a little more understandable. Players are emotional. They just played a huge game, whatever. Coaches have to be the cooler heads that prevail in those situations, right? For Mike Norvell to rip Billy a new one when Billy's just coaching and the game it's not like Billy told George Gums to go plant the flag. You know what I mean? For him to first go rip Billy a new one and then go grab the flag himself and toss, like, come on, man.
Well, I think some of that, too, is Billy had taken 3 recruits from him.
Good.
In the previous 10 days. So, and then Billy puts a number on him on the field, and I think that was just a culmination for Mike Norvell.
If that's the price to pay, I hope I see Mike Norvell do this every single Florida State game the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. Want to get into recruiting. Got to spend a lot of time on that. Signing day was this past Wednesday, at least the December portion of signing day. Today's Gator Bytes podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialists. You can go to their website, se-ortho.com. Again, for the highest quality care here in Northeast Florida, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialists, and you can listen to the good doctor, Kevin Murphy, Thursday mornings in the 7 o'clock hour with Jeff and Dan right here on 1010XL for his weekly analysis of injuries in the world of sports. Clearly, the last month for Florida Gator football recruiting was exceptional. Signing day itself was not great because no Jamie French, no Dallas Wilson, no Solomon Thomas. They kind of swung for the fences on a few guys, and they didn't get it. But it was a solid ground rule double, if not a triple. Whereas a month ago, they had basically struck out. So you go from striking out to me, Graham, admittedly, or at worst, getting a ground rule double, if not a triple. Was it a home run? No, because you didn't flip any of the 5 stars. But what you did do is the only guy you lost on signing day was Tayshawn Gelsey from here in Riverside. And I'm pretty sure Florida had an inkling that was going to happen anyway. Yes, it's considered to be a flip, but I think Florida kind of knew that was going to happen. It didn't catch them off guard. Whereas Florida caught a lot of teams off guard in the 10 days leading up to signing day, flipping Ty Jackson, flipping Byron Louis, the running back from Florida State.
Drake Stubbs,
obviously, from Mandarin. I had him on Hacker After Dark. He was all fired up to be a member of the University of Florida. Florida did have some shock value, whereas they weren't completely shocked, other than maybe Dallas Wilson, which that was Nike just throwing an obscene amount of money at him, I think.
I tweeted after Florida lost out on Dallas Wilson that I think if that battle had been between Florida and anyone else, I think Florida ends up bringing it home and signing him. Oregon was just cleaning up everything.
Well, and my thing too, does it suck to not get Dallas Wilson? Yeah, it does, but at least it's not an SEC team. At least it's not Florida State. You'll never have to deal with him unless it's in the playoff. So as bad as it was, at least he didn't leave you at the altar to go to Tallahassee.
Yeah.
Or leave you at the altar to go to Athens or Knoxville.
Yeah.
That would have compounded it.
Yeah. Or Miami.
Right.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think you described it very accurately when we first started the show, when you kicked it off, saying Florida had a really good early signing class. Not a great, not an elite, a really good early. It's an A-. Right? Would you agree?
Yeah, and people were talking about the wide receivers because Dallas Wilson and Jamie French went elsewhere. Let's not forget about a couple of things. They kept Nashawn Montgomery, who was flirting with Louisville big time, and Miami.
And Alabama.
A lot of them. Vernell Brown is a stud.
He's a composite 5-star.
He's a stud. Now, what's interesting about him, and Ben Hanks too, those are literally the 2 highest-rated Gator recruits that they signed. I think people just take them for granted because they're legacy players. Oh, Vernell, his dad's Vernell Brown. Oh, Ben Hanks, the linebacker back in the mid-'90s. Look at the kids themselves. Those are the 2 best guys Florida probably signed. Vernell Brown could be a stud at wide receiver, and Ben Hanks Jr. could be the man in the Gator secondary for the next 3 to 4 years.
And as a legacy kid, do you get a leg up in the recruiting? Of course you do. But that doesn't mean you're always going to get him.
No, Miami was really in on Ben Hanks.
Let me ask you a question. Does Emmitt Smith's kid play for the Gators?
Oh, he does not.
Correct. Exactly. When they played Texas A&M, E.J. Smith's dad was the honorary Mr. Two-Bits for the game.
Yeah.
And then E.J. Smith played for A&M.
Right.
A team that kicked our ass in Gainesville, by the way. So totally understand that it's a leg up. I get it. Obviously is. It's obviously not the same recruiting a legacy versus a kid that has no family ties to you. I totally get it. But you still got to bring it home. It's not like you just give them one call in the spring. You say, hey, here's the offer. And they're like, okay, I'm coming, locked in, no questions asked. There's still work to do to make sure they end up on your campus and sign. And they did.
Yeah. A couple of things in talking to some recruiting guys this week. Everybody loves Tavares Dice, the offensive tackle that was committed to Auburn.
Huge flip.
Flips to Florida. People love him. People love Jaden Woods, the Penn State defensive end that flipped on Penn State to Florida. And then we talked about Ben Hanks. We talked about Vernell Brown. And then Ty Jackson's the other one. Ty Jackson was committed to Southern Cal. And what I love about Ty Jackson is he was one of those Gator recruits that was in the stands against Miami week 1. When the Miami players are yelling at all the Gator recruits, remember that?
Come to the U.
Come to the U. Florida sucks, this, that, and the other.
Katie Turner's having to, shoo him off the field,
well,
basically.
Obviously, maybe that mattered then because Ty Jackson, I think, committed to USC, the following week. But Billy survived that, was able to get a guy like Ty Jackson back in the fold. And Ty Jackson, a linebacker, to me, is going to be a very good player.
Billy Napier said he has maybe the best film he's ever seen. They watch a lot of tape on high school kids, Hack.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time they're down in Gainesville watching tape.
We know how Southern Cal feels about those linebackers. Southern Cal was not happy they lost Ty Jackson.
Yeah, and that's a team in Southern Cal, too, that's under Lincoln Riley perpetually had bad defense, and they desperately need good recruits to fix that. And that's been a big bugaboo of Lincoln Riley's entire head coaching career. So you think he doesn't want high-level 4-star, 5-star talent at linebacker? Of course he does.
Yeah.
So huge flip. That linebacker room all of a sudden is loaded. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I mean,
next year you're talking Grayson Howard, Shamar James,
Jaden
Robinson, Miles Graham. I mean,
you mentioned Pup Howard. You mentioned Pup Howard.
I mean, that linebacker room is freakishly athletic and hits people.
Yeah. And Ty Jackson is going to have an opportunity to play next year. A lot of these guys, and of the 23 that signed with Florida on Wednesday, I think Billy Napier said 18 of them will be on campus in a month.
That's
18
crazy.
18 of the 23 will go through spring drills.
And that's becoming more the norm, I think, anyways. That's why most of these guys want to sign early, is a lot of them want to go ahead and get in and play in spring ball because your chances of playing as a freshman are so much higher.
And you look, too, on the defensive line, we mentioned Jaden Woods, a couple of big defensive tackles, including Jeremiah McLeod, who there was a thought that he could leave. He stayed. Joseph, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name.
Joseph Mbachu.
There you go. From Florida to Texas, back to Florida. The Georgia kid, the kid that decommitted from Georgia, came to Florida. So there's 4 big-time defensive linemen. To me, the D-line was probably the highlight of the class because you got some really – I guess the secondary, too.
I would say DBs,
The secondary, because not only did you get Ben Hanks, you mentioned Stubbs, Laganza Hayward, right, from Tennessee. That's a big one. The secondary and the D-line, I thought Florida absolutely cleaned up.
I totally agree. The defensive side of the football, generally speaking, was the better recruited side this class, which is not the end of the world offensively as long as you hit the portal hard.
Which means that's right. You're going to go into the portal on offense, and you're going to go get a bunch of guys.
And I wanted to transition the conversation into that if we could. I think we hit the signing class pretty well and what everybody talked about, what they liked and disliked. I think we generally agree, I think, on pretty much all this based on kind of how you were describing it is pretty much exactly how I feel. That said, knowing who they did recruit, knowing what talent they are going to bring in, knowing that in any given class like this, when you have a pretty good amount of blue chip guys, on any given year, you can probably expect a couple of them to end up breaking out and really playing a lot for you as a freshman. For the most part, these guys are going to need a year-ish to develop, right? That's pretty normal.
You could get lucky with a Jaden Baugh, who, by the way, Jaden Baugh, I think, was a February signee last year. So even though most of the hay is in the barn, they could get a diamond in the rough like a Jaden Baugh, who they got in February before he came in.
2 years ago, Eugene Wilson was an early signee, but he didn't play. He didn't come early.
Right.
He didn't enroll early. He came and then ended up being their second best receiver behind Ricky Pearsall his freshman year.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means, normally speaking, when you have a decent signing class like this, you're going to end up with, across the whole roster, maybe like 3 to 4 freshmen that are like really playing a lot and really like starting, contributing a ton. And then everybody else will play at times, get more playing time if there's an injury or two, and for the most part, develop that first year. That's pretty standard. That's pretty normal. That said, kind of being able to look from a macro perspective at the whole roster after most of the hay, not all to your point, most of the hay is in the barn, signing class-wise, what positions, in your opinion, Hack, do they need to nail in the transfer portal?
Got to get a backup quarterback.
Agree, yes.
You got to get a wide receiver or 2, and you got to get a couple of offensive linemen.
And I think defensive linemen also.
Yeah. Now, yes. Now, Cam Jackson is definitely gone. You're assuming Banks and Sapp are both gone?
I'm assuming Banks for sure. Sapp is more of a coin flip.
Because hypothetically, Banks and Sapp could have another year.
They could.
I don't believe that they will have another year, but they could. If you lose Banks, Sapp, you're losing Cam Jackson, then yes, you'll have TJ Searcy, you'll have LJ McCray, you'll have some dudes, but yes, you will need to get, and again, we talked about the 4 freshman D linemen coming in, which are going to be good, but they're going to be freshmen, so you will need to bring in some bodies on the D line.
They, I think, for the most part, are okay on the edges. They need maybe 2 defensive tackles, in my opinion, that can play for them right away.
Pyburn's back too, right?
Right, but but everybody we just named are all edges.
Yeah.
I need like 2 space eating D tackles.
Yeah,
because we didn't mention either of those in Desmond Watson also,
right?
Who is a monster in short yardage. He did not get enough credit all year, in my opinion.
I agree.
That guy. I mean, look, go back to the Ole Miss game. JJ Pegues, that defensive tackle for them that always rushes on short yardage. He had an 100% success rate before the Gator game. They play against the Gators, who has a 400-plus D tackle. All of a sudden, he's getting stopped almost every time.
He was like 2 of 5, wasn't he?
Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I guess he having to bounce it outside because Big 21 was
correct.
In the middle.
Exactly. Yeah. Eating up 2 guys.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say Desmond Watson is Aaron Donald here. That's not what I mean. I'm not saying he doesn't play every down, but in short yardage, he was really important and helped them stop the run a lot. Between losing him, I believe they're probably going to lose Caleb Banks, and Cam Jackson is definitely gone.
I think Sapp probably leaves too, would be my guess.
But Sapp, to your point, we just named, Searcy, Pyburn, Gums, like you just named multiple guys on the edges that can replace that.
Yeah.
You're going to get LJ McCray, who you expect to be a big-time contributor, obviously. But I would go in the portal. To me, they need like 2 space-eating D tackles.
And again, you need 2
that can play right now.
I agree. And then you have the 2 freshmen coming in, the 2 4-stars, which again, they're true freshmen, but you're going to have 2 big bodies there. But yes.
Who you would hope can branch out and play, but I don't want to rely on them.
Right. I agree. So no, you need 2, maybe 3 interior D linemen. And then I think you need more so depth on the O-line. You forget too, like Roderick Kearney's going to come back from injury. All those injured guys, and Florida had an injury report that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
That'll be something we talk about this offseason.
Fletcher Westfall's been developing all year.
Well, all those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, Florida had 20 guys on their injury report at certain points.
Yeah.
With 12 guys out like every week. Devin Moore's coming back. Obviously, Aaron Gates will be back. I mean, there's going to be a lot of good things coming back off the injury report starting next year. We got to go quick here, but 2025. Obviously, we have a bowl game. We'll talk to that. But you and I are sitting here in the early part of December. And we'll obviously do Gator Bytes many, many times before they kick off against Miami next year. Basically the same schedule, with the exception of a couple.
Miami's the second game, I think.
Yeah. Oh, is it the second game?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's the first game? A cupcake?
I think, yeah.
I'll look it up. But yeah, but essentially the same schedule.
It's that Long Island team, I think, because they're not playing FAMU.
Yeah, that's weird too. Why FAMU bailed.
I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, but anyway, I'm assuming they'll beat Long Island. So your next game of substance will be Miami. But you're still got Texas, you still got Georgia, LSU. You're basically running it back, just home games this year, road games next year, vice versa. Realistic expectation this year to me was 7-5, and I would have taken that and ran with it. I mean, am I crazy to think your realistic expectation is to be in at least competing for a playoff spot next year?
No, not at all. It's year 4. This is Florida. I told Dylan this the other day when we did Denmark and Marsh. It is not unreasonable whatsoever next year for the expectation to be that from the time the season kicks off to the time that the college football playoff is officially announced and the bracket is set of all 12 teams, for Florida to be in that conversation the entire season.
Mm-hmm.
With a 12-team playoff, when you turn on SEC Network and you see Peter Burns and Doring and those guys, or you turn on your podcast, your Josh Pates of the world, I know you have on a lot, when you tune into 1010XL and we're talking college football, whoever you listen to, when they talk college football playoff, the University of Florida has to get mentioned. And it doesn't mean they're going to make it necessarily. I wouldn't go as far as say they have to make it with a loaded SEC and another tough schedule and whatever. But all season, you've got to be someone that people are talking about as could take up one of those 12 spots.
Real quick, you mentioned Long Island. I've literally never heard of them. Have you?
No.
Okay. That's who Florida opens with. UCF switches out with USF next year.
Mm-hmm.
So Florida, that's the second game.
Oh, okay. That's
so Miami, according to this anyway, Miami is the third. Well, Miami will probably be the fourth game because the dates haven't been announced for the conference games, with the exception of Georgia. But LIU, USF, at Miami, Georgia, Florida State, and then obviously your other home games: Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas. Your road games, LSU, Ole Miss, A&M, and Kentucky. But you get your home schedule is Texas is at home, Tennessee's at home, Florida State's at home. But your road games next year, when you throw Miami in, you're in Miami, you're in Baton Rouge, you're in Oxford, you're in College Station, and you're in the Commonwealth in Lexington. That's tough.
That's a tough road schedule. Yeah. Florida had a really hard schedule this year, and a lot was made of it, but they did get a lot of their tough games at home.
But again, you do get Texas at home next year, you get Tennessee at home next year, you get Florida State at home next year. That's true. So it kind of evens out a little bit. All right. More on football, more on the bowl game. By the way, a lot of websites are reporting Florida, Michigan could be a potential game at somewhere. I know a lot of people here locally are hoping the Gator Bowl. I've seen Gator Bowl matchups potentially against Duke, which would be interesting.
Syracuse
is another one. Do you have a preference as to where Florida goes? Do you care?
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, I want the Gator Bowl because it's right here in town. I would like to take a trip to Tampa, and Relay Quest Bowl or Gasparilla, I think would be fun.
The Relay Quest Bowl that's the one. Is that the former Outback Bowl?
I believe so.
Okay, because that's the one that's the Michigan.
I'm bad about bowls and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't want to play Michigan. I'm so sad. We play them every 3 years in a bowl game.
I wouldn't mind Syracuse or Duke.
Correct. But they don't play Syracuse and Duke all the time, so it's fun.
Yeah.
Michigan, it's like, dude, every single season, both of those teams have a disappointing year and aren't where they want to be. They play each other in a freaking bowl game. I'm so sick of playing Michigan.
Before you were alive, Florida went to Syracuse and got their doors blown off in like 1991 or 92. Kirby Dardar ran the opening kickoff for a touchdown. I'm still jaded by that. I was like 7 or 8 years old, but I remember in that dome, Florida just got absolutely worked.
Well, there'd be nothing like a Florida-Syracuse Gator Bowl to help right the wrongs of that game.
There's no from 30-plus years ago, absolutely. So we'll get into the bowl game. We'll obviously keep you up to date on all the transfer portal stuff. But I do want to end with basketball quickly. Again, Gator Bytes is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for any orthopedic injury or concern. They have locations all over Jacksonville and St. Augustine, including Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the Beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. All right, Todd Golden and Gator Hoops. They're good. It's a shame they're not in the ACC. They already have wins over Florida State, Wake Forest, and Virginia. They're 3-0 against ACC teams. Hey, ACC, I don't want to hear, at least for this year, you saying anything about how you're the best conference in America. The SEC-ACC Challenge, did you see the final tally on that?
14-2.
14-2. And the only SEC losses, amazingly enough, were the two highest-ranked teams. Kentucky lost and Auburn lost, which is crazy.
And Auburn played at Cameron Indoor against Duke.
The other 14 SEC schools all gave their ACC counterparts the beating.
Yeah.
Including Florida taking care of Virginia in a big way by almost 20.
Well, I was going to say it's important to note, too, that a lot of these games weren't close.
No. Blowouts.
Alabama went up to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I like the Tar Heels, people that know it, so I watched a lot of that game, and murdered Carolina. It wasn't even close.
The SEC is the best conference in college basketball this year.
Yeah, and I don't even think
it's not close.
It's not particularly close.
Having said that, Florida's obviously going to have a tough road, but this is a Gator team that might be in the top 10 next week. They're number 13 right now, a dominating win over Virginia. I don't think they play again for like a week. It's like the last big break in their schedule before conference play opens up. They still have some interesting non-conference games left. But the bottom line is Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Alex Condon, Will Richard, you name it, Thomas Howe, all these guys. Elijah Martin's a stud, by the way.
Stud.
Unbelievably good start for Todd Golden in Gator basketball.
You know who Elijah Martin reminds me of? You remember Casey Prather?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day?
Yeah, I like Casey Prather.
I get with
Back
Pat
with him
Young.
and Will You Get.
Will You Get, Scotty Wilbekin, Pat Young, and those boys. Elijah Martin, he's a better shooter than Casey Prather, but I think that's a lot just because people just shoot more nowadays in general. But built, really athletic, put together, doesn't get pushed around, and can get to the rim whenever he wants.
But him and Walter Clayton, there is a legit argument that Elijah Martin and Walter Clayton are the best backcourt in America. They're in the conversation.
I agree.
You know, I don't know. You'd have to obviously look at it, but it's not crazy to say that they're in the conversation to be the best backcourt in America.
No, and they're both extremely experienced. They've played a ton of basketball.
I'll tell you what I love, too, is Aberdeen coming off the bench.
Yeah.
You could do a lot worse than having Aberdeen come off the bench as your third guard.
And this team, you know what I love about this team, Hack, and what encourages me to think that they are going to make the tournament and make a run when it's all said and done in March.
The fact that they've absolutely destroyed their first 9 opponents.
Well, yeah, of course. But they also, the shooting has come and gone for them so far this year. They've had games where they haven't shot particularly well, but they still win and win a lot of those games. And I get it. They're not playing, it's not like they've played Duke every game, but even in the games they don't shoot well, they still win a lot of the time and still win convincingly because they do everything else really well.
Mm-hmm.
They play really stout defense. They play hard on the defensive end. They rush for loose balls. They get rebounds on the offensive and defensive end. They get to the line. When they're not shooting well, that's something that's really important. Elijah Martin and Clayton and Condon, when the team isn't shooting well, they get to the rim and they get fouled and they make their free throws. And that's incredibly important in college basketball. How many times in the Mike White era did we watch a Florida team that when they weren't shooting well, they'd go on a 7-minute drought?
Yeah.
And they couldn't score to save their lives.
All the time.
With this team, that doesn't happen because they're able to identify, and this Todd Golden deserves credit for this. They're able to identify in games when they don't have it behind the arc, and they say, and you can tell when you watch the Virginia game is not part of this because they were shooting well in that game. They were shooting really well. But in other games this year, when you watch, you're able to see, if you're watching the whole game, that switch they make at some point. They're like, hey, we don't have it beyond the arc today. We're attacking the rim every time. If we give up a basket, we're pushing it right up the court. We're not letting them get a second to breathe. And we're getting to the line, we're getting fouled, and we're shooting more free throws. And they do it all the time, and it's really, really effective. Alex Condon is one of the most underappreciated players in America. He is unbelievably, I mean, how many bigs can run an entire fast break coast to coast by themselves? You see that?
Yeah.
He went coast to coast on his own.
Well, Condon is great, and I'll tell you this, Hal hadn't played very well to begin the year. He was kind of having a sophomore slump. He looks like he's starting to come on
Thomas Houck, yeah.
Thomas Houck. So I really like both of those guys. But again, Walter Clayton, Will Richard hasn't even really played very well yet this year. Wait till he gets cooking. Very, very positive. What's your guy in the middle? Chinwelu?
Ruben Chinyelu.
Chinwelu, yeah, that guy. I like that guy. Now, and you know, what's interesting is I had a buddy of mine tell me, well, man, what if they had Han Lockton? And that's true. What if they did have Han Lockton? By the way, Han Lockton's on the sideline jumping up and down. That leg looks pretty good. I mean, I know he's going to redshirt this year, but obviously he'll be ready to go next year. But if Han Lockton's there, then Chinelu's not here. So they basically traded out one for the other.
And we were talking about this a little bit offline before we started. I think Han Lockton's better, but knowing that you weren't going to have him this year, you needed a guy like Chinyelu and an extra body on defense that can accumulate some fouls if you need it and can play hard and get his hands up. And
I don't mind Sam Alexis.
Sam Alexis is a good player. He'll get better, I think, as the year goes on, too. But we talked about this a little bit off air before we started. It gets back to the effort and the passion and the intensity they play with. They're never asleep, this team. I haven't seen them all year yet. It's a young season, so there's more games to play, but I haven't seen a game where they're just sluggish and slow. And we talked about this off air, like Micah Han Lockton is a guy that knows he's not going to play all year. He's medically redshirting for the whole year. They pan to him on the sideline, and that guy is as invested in every single one of his teammates scoring and making plays as anybody on the sideline. And that is a testament to the type of culture they have. That is a testament to how close their team is, how much they care, how into it they are. And I think Han Lockton on the sideline this year is a microcosm of their entire team and showing how into it they are and how together they are.
Final thought. Have you seen their upcoming schedule?
It's Arizona State, and then they got Carolina and Charlotte.
So check this out. They have 4 non-conference games left before conference play. Arizona State and Atlanta. That's on a week from tomorrow, the 14th. Then they play North Carolina and Charlotte. That'll be tough. Then you get UNF. UNF's got victories over Georgia Tech and South Carolina. That's not a bad contest. And they play Stetson. They jump into SEC play on Saturday, June 4th at Rupp Arena.
That's crazy, isn't it?
And then, oh, by the way, Tuesday, January 7th, the conference home opener against Tennessee.
Oh, my God.
And then, just for the icing on top, their third conference game, Saturday, January 11th, let's go play Calipari in Fayetteville. Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, right out of the gate when conference play opens.
I love this team a lot. I think they're going to go places. I think they're going to make a run. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're probably not going to stay undefeated.
No, the SEC, that's brutal, man.
That is crazy, man.
Brutal. But
they're
it's fun.
so good, dude.
It's fun right now. They have a week off. By the way, they have 2 week-long breaks. They don't play again until the 14th against Arizona State. And then they play the 21st against UNF, take the Christmas break off. Their final non-conference is the 29th against Stetson. And then they dive right into conference play that following week. All right, anything else you need to hit before we get out of here? Any words of wisdom? Anything you want to share with your old school Jaguar apparel on?
My last word of wisdom is, if you're the type of person that listens to this podcast and you kind of tune it out when we start talking basketball, watch this team.
Yeah,
you're going to have a lot of fun watching this team. I promise you. I'm not selling you a fake Mike White bill of goods. This team, with Todd Golden at the helm, we'll see with the investigation and stuff. It doesn't seem like much. It's a weird situation,
amazing,
but whatever.
How quiet that's gotten.
If something else happens, we'll obviously update you. But other than that, we're just going to business as usual. This team is so much fun to watch. So much. It is the most fun I've had watching Gator basketball in like a decade.
No, I agree. It's been fun. It's been good. And they dominated Florida State, Wake Forest, and Virginia. They're 3-0 against the ACC. They got one more ACC game left, and that's against North Carolina in Charlotte coming up in about a week and a half. That is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker Ryan Green. Thank you to Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for bringing it to you. Gator Bytes, 1010XL.com, and the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page.